in a world full of negative people. Hey man, I'm just trying to be a positive guy, a positive farmer, a positive outfitter. This is a Shark Farmer podcast with your host, Rob Sharkey. Whatever.
And welcome again to Shark Farmer Podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Rob Sharkey, and today we're going to go to, okay, here we go. I'm going to try this. Wadmalaw. Is that right, Bill?
That's perfect.
It is perfect. Okay.
Yeah, Wadmalaw Island.
Where is this?
Wadmalaw is about half an hour from downtown Charleston, so about 20 miles.
They call it an island for a reason, right? It's actually an island.
Yes, it is an island, but people tend to think that there's a bridge to get. I mean, there's a ferry that you have to take to the island, but there's a bridge.
How big's the island?
I would say the island is 12 miles by 5 miles.
Do you own it?
No, not the whole island. No, I wish I did.
That'd be really cool, wouldn't it? You just walk around, say, "Hey, I'm Bill. I own a damn island."
Yeah, there you go. The small part of the island.
Yes, today we're talking with Bill Hall from Wadmalaw Island, South Carolina. Now, Bill, we've had you on the XM show, and it was fascinating, the stuff you told us about growing tea in the U.S. and being a tea, now was it taster? That's your official title.
Yeah, tea taster, right.
Tea taster. Okay, and we want to get into that. But, Bill, we have to do an ad. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Yeah, I like doing ads, but I don't like doing this ad because it's kind of an ad for myself, but I agreed to it. So here we are. Coming to the RFD channel at RFD TV. It's on the Dish Network. Did you get the Dish Network there in Wadmalaw?
Yes, actually, I do have Dish.
Okay. Then you are in luck with this. Coming this spring, it's Shark Farmer TV, and that's basically me in front of a green screen. But what's cool is that I get to show videos and pictures and stories of people in agriculture. So these really cool people out there doing really cool things, we get to now put them on TV and highlight them there so that the rest of the world can see them. So that I'm very, very excited about.
That would be wonderful.
You know what I'm not excited about, though, Bill?
What's that?
Reading the teleprompter. Apparently, I lack the ability to do that.
It's hard to do two things at the same time, be friendly, funny, and read at the same time.
Yeah, here's the thing. These are all these TV people, right? And they know what they're doing. They're like, well, read, you're supposed to make love to the glass, which is where the words are coming up. And they said, well, just don't stare into it. Look back like you're looking at the video. I'm like, okay, you guys know what you're doing. So I'm reading along, and then I look back, and then I lose my place to where it is because the teleprompter never stops moving. And I'm finding it very difficult to do.
Yeah, well, you'll become a pro in short time, I'm sure.
I'm guessing we won't get a second season, but we'll see. Coming this spring, that's on the Dish Network. That is the RFD TV channel. I think it's 231 or something. I don't know if it changes or whatever, but it's there. It's the rural channel. Do you ever watch that, Bill?
No, I can't say I do.
Okay.
I can't say I do.
That's all right. I'm going to edit that out so I don't get in trouble.
Okay. That's right.
Tune in, please, because I would love to have a second season. Today, though, we're talking with Bill Hall. Now, Bill, you really aren't a farmer, right?
I didn't start out farming, although when I was a kid, I used to bale hay and put it in farmers' barns and stuff like that. So it's not like I didn't know how to run tractors and balers and rakes, so that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't set out to be a farmer. But tea involves farming, so I fell into it down the road, right?
Yes. So long and the short of it, what we're going to be talking about is that you are the only large-scale tea plantation in the U.S., correct?
Yes, basically, we're the largest. There are some other people growing tea, but they're much smaller scale. They don't have factories where it's produced in mass, working under FDA rules and OSHA rules, all that sort of thing. So we are really the only large-scale tea-growing farm in America, absolutely.
Okay, us in agriculture, we like to talk about I'm fifth generation farm. My kids are sixth generation live on a farm. You're something else. You are, if I remember, you're third generation tea taster.
That is correct, right, which is an unusual profession, to say the least.
Can you explain it to us?
Well, to be a tea taster, tea is, I guess to put it simply, tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world. So the number one beverage in the world is, of course, water.
Mm-hmm.
So tea is the second most consumed beverage in the world, and it's grown all over the world. India, Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, countries in Africa, China, obviously Indonesia, all these countries. So tea is a unique crop insofar as it's grown every 15 to 18 days on average. So all you're doing is harvesting those top leaves that grow up on the bushes every 15 to 18 days. So obviously there's a lot of tasting to make sure that the tea is correct, that it was made correctly, this, that, and the other, and this is where tea tasting comes in. The taster is basically there to value how much the tea is worth internationally, and then, of course, blending the teas together. Because unlike wine or coffee or other products, the crop is grown once a year. It's harvested once a year, it's processed once a year, and that's your quality. You either had a good year, bad year, indifferent year. But tea is unusual that it's grown every 15 to 18 days. So consequently, the quality can fluctuate. Too much rain, not enough rain, the beginning of the season, middle of the season, end of the season, too hot, too cold, all influence the flavor of the tea you're making. So that's why there's so much tasting involved with tea, and that's why you basically need a tea taster.
This starts back with your grandfather then?
Yes, my grandfather and my father were both tea tasters, and obviously not obviously, but my heritage goes back to England. So my grandfather, my father and mother, my mother was Scottish, my father was Canadian. I was born in Canada. I'm the third generation tea taster.
Okay, and how does one get that title?
Well, that's involved. You have to really go through when I was younger and I did my apprenticeship was really a tea tasting apprenticeship. So the world tea trade was centered around England. So London was the auction every week from tea all over the world. So you went to England to be a tea taster or to London to be a tea taster, and your apprenticeship involved tasting approximately, at least mine was 800 to 1,000 cups of tea a day, 5 days a week for 4 years. So basically, at the end of your 4-year apprenticeship, tasting that much tea, you're a tea taster whether you want to be or not, basically.
How did your bladder fare during those times?
Well, that's not too bad because obviously you don't swallow 800 to 1,000 cups of tea a day. You're just tasting the cup, and obviously you spit everything out unless you run across something you really, really like the flavor of.
I would think that it would just become numb at that point. So does the tasting actually increase? Do you hone it? Because I would think it would all start tasting the same.
No, not really, because, well, what we did, at least my apprenticeship, we'd have 40 teas on one side of the bench and 40 teas on the other side of the bench. So you would do 80 teas at a time. And you would have a control that you're working with or your blend. So you're tasting your blend and then you're tasting the actual tea and you're saying, is this better or worse that my target is or my control sample that I'm shooting for? And that's how you would value the tea. And you had to value the tea in those days to 1/4 cent a pound. So one tea may be, just to pick an example, 80 cents a pound. The other tea might be $2.55 a pound. So it really is something that you have to do on a daily basis. And no, your taste buds are your taste buds. You're training them strictly for that tea. But I must say, when it comes to lunchtime, you're ready to eat. Trust me.
I bet. Now, were you tasting warm tea or cold tea?
And it's always tasted warm, hot tea.
If I'm growing tea, right? If I'm a farmer and I'm growing tea leaves, you were the one that was determining my price. So what you were doing was actually very important.
Right, because many things can go wrong in the production of tea that would influence the flavor of it, which would eventually influence the price that you would get for your product. So really, you can burn the tea, dry it too much to the point where it's burnt, and then it's undesirable and have a very low price. Or you can make a spectacular tea and make the money off that. You'd get a higher price than other teas. So it's very important that the farmers and everything followed the rules of making tea exactly to get the best quality they can from the leaf. But the whole thing, the interesting thing with tea, or basically anything, the quality starts in the field, and you can ruin it in the factory. So the quality starts in the field. If you have poor quality leaf from the field, you're never going to make a good quality tea. So everything stems from the beginning as the growing and the harvesting and husbandry of growing tea, so to speak.
Okay, of course, I always look at the farmer side of it, right? And I would be complaining constantly that it wasn't rated high enough. What happens when one of these tea farmers wants to question your value? Was that an option?
No option in that, because you have to understand this tea is going to an auction every week in London. So I'm not the only one bidding on that tea. There's other companies that might outbid me because they think it's a little better than I think. You're really no way to come back at the tasters and say you're doing me an injustice, because it's really supply and demand, and you have many buyers buying in that London auction. So the price is the price.
To me, that's a massive responsibility you were doing there.
Well, it is for the company that I was working for, sure, because we need to buy tea, and we need to package it up and sell it to the public. So valuing the tea correctly is a win or lose for the company. If you're buying tea correctly and it's getting a good price, you'll get a good price out in the marketplace with it. If you are buying bad tea and trying to sell it at a higher price, the final determining factor is the consumer that says, I like this tea better than I like the other tea. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of important that. And the other thing that plays a big part with tea, nothing to do, well, it is to do with the tasting, but tea does not improve with age. It deteriorates with age. So the fresher the tea, the more smooth and mellow the taste is going to be, whereas older tea can become harsh and bitter. So it's not only just how you make the tea, it's how quickly you move it through your company and to the consumer.
Is this how it's still done?
No, the auctions have kind of gone by the wayside now, and it's more direct buying from country of origin. So a lot of the big companies now have offices in these countries. The countries still hold auctions, but a lot more tea is done strictly with the estates, the tea growing plantations, the tea plantations, and the companies that are buying the tea. The old style auction in London is long gone now. There is no London tea auction. So most of it is all done overseas.
Okay. I mean, this was a big part of your family. Does that make you a little sad?
Not really. I mean, the London auction was good. It was interesting. It was fun going to the London auction to buy tea in the auction. the tea industry still continues on, and you still are tasting the tea. You're tasting it in your office, and then you're sending out a bid to the actual plantation where the tea is grown, and it's up to them whether they accept it or don't accept it.
Mm-hmm.
No one is trying to say, okay, how can I give you an example? Wheat is wheat, right? I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a wheat farmer, but there is an international price for wheat,
Yes.
right? There's an international price for gasoline, for soybeans, for this, that, and the other. Tea, that's not the case because it's fluctuating all over the place. So it still is a farmer to the consumer through the packer that gives you the quality of what you're looking for.
But when I interview, like, say, the traders that were there back in the day where all the trading was done on the floor at the Chicago board, the crazy scenes that, the mob scenes and everybody's yelling at that's all changed. I mean, it's all done electronically now. You go up there and it's quiet as can be. You talk to those guys and they kind of give the same answer, but they do look back at those times with a very nostalgic look. It's like that was really something when we were doing that. And I think there is some sadness when they do talk about how it's changed. Is this something you look back kind of like those traders do?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I do look back at it as fun days because there were not just companies that are buying to package the tea, but there's also traders that are buying and selling. So they're buying for one price and trying to sell it later on at a higher price. So it was a lot more fun, a lot more interesting, and some of the things you would do trading was quite funny in a way, now you have to think of in England, okay? A stiff upper lip and all that sort of thing. So there wasn't a lot of shouting and yelling, so to speak. But as a buyer, at least when I was the buyer there, you didn't actually talk to the auctioneer. You had your broker next to you, and he would call out what price you were prepared to pay.
Okay.
And you could split, say there was 20 tea chests coming in on this particular lot. So you would say, okay, I bid $3.50 a pound. And someone in the auction room would say, can I have 5 of those chests? And it's up to you to say, no, I'm not going to split this, or I am going to split it. Suppose that you said, no, I'm not going to give you 5. So if he wanted it, he'd have to put the price up. And this would go on and on to the point where you feel you've milked him enough, and then you pull away. He only wants 5 chests, but he ends up with the 20 of them. It was kind of fun in that respect, and it would happen to you at times as well. You'd get shafted by other people in there. But that was free trade, and it was good fun. We had an auction every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, which was amazing because the Monday auction, I think, was the Indian auction, all the teas from India. The Tuesday auction was all the Ceylon, or Sri Lanka, as we call the country today, Sri Lanka tea. And then Wednesday was the other parts of the world. So it was kind of interesting that you had these 3 main auctions every week in London for years and years. It was a tradition. And I miss it, yeah.
Yeah, I tell you, I've interviewed you. I've interviewed the old traders in Chicago. Extremely similar. I think they cussed a lot more when they were trading, but I mean, it's like I'm talking to the same person. It's very cool. I think it's fascinating. Right. Okay,
right.
Let's talk about your plantation, and that's what you call it, right?
Yes, yeah. It's well, there's 2 names for their tea plantations or their tea estates. So it's either one or the other.
Okay.
And there's no difference between the 2.
So when did you get started with all this?
I started in tea when I was 17, 18 years old and worked in a factory. That was my introduction to tea. So I worked in the factory, and my first job was the tea came in tea chests, so wooden chests. And inside these wooden chests were lined with paper and aluminum foil, right? So my first job was to take the paper out of the tea chest and the aluminum foil, put the paper in one chest, put the aluminum foil in the other, because the company sold the aluminum foil.
Sure.
So that was my first job, and I was in a factory for a year, ended up blending the tea, getting the blend sheets from the blender and going and picking the individual teas out, cutting them open, dumping them in a blender where they'd be blended and then sent to the machines for packaging. And so I kind of went through the whole gambit of factory working in tea.
You started like at the bottom then.
Oh, yeah, definitely at the bottom. And I had to wash all the vice president's cars every Friday.
How many was there?
There are about 4 or 5 cars I had to wash every Friday.
It was probably like some little perk, right? It's like they didn't get a pay raise, but they say, hey, we'll make you vice president, so that kid has to wash your car.
Right. And we had a little machine that I'd have to push back and forth, wash the car and clean it all up and get it all ready for the VP. And, it was fun. I didn't mind doing it.
Okay, starting at the bottom, you became the tea taster. Well, when did we actually start growing tea leaves?
Okay, so just quickly started in the factory, went to England, did my apprenticeship in England. Then I went to Holland. The apprenticeship in England was with the largest tea packer in the world at the time, which was a company called Brook Bonds. And they had a tea called PG Tips, which was very popular and famous in England. And then from after my apprenticeship, half my apprenticeship I spent with the largest tea dealer. In other words, buying and selling teas all over the world, and that was in Holland, in Rotterdam. And then after that, I was sent overseas. Fortunate, I was sent to Argentina, because people don't realize in America, actually, that Argentina is the largest supplier of tea to America. And you would think, wait a minute, what about India, Ceylon, Indonesia, China, all these other countries? Well, Argentina is a large producer of tea. So I went to Argentina, lived in Argentina for 4 years as a buyer for the company, the trading company that I worked for. And then I left there. I was going to go to manage some tea plantations in Rwanda and go other places, but I decided I'd come to America and do tea here. I still have a trading company where I buy and sell tea all over the world, but I got into the actual growing of the tea in Argentina because I'd visit a lot of the tea plantations, and in the tea world, I traveled all over the world looking at tea plantations and looking at their manufacture and how they made tea. So when I got to America, I was on a trip to a tea convention where I saw in one of our trade magazines the history of tea in America, and I never realized the history of tea in America dates back to 1799. And there were a few attempts to grow tea in America, and everyone said it's not possible for the fact that cost of labor is so high in this country, the land is not necessarily warm enough for tea, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where I got interested in the actual growing of the tea, per se.
You know what you are, Bill? You ever seen those commercials with the Dos Equis beer, and they got the guy, the most interesting man in the world?
Oh, yeah, right.
You're that for tea. You could be the tea representative. You could be that guy.
The ambassador of tea, the world ambassador of tea.
It didn't end up well for him. They shipped him off to a one-way trip to Mars. But for a little while, you could definitely be in the limelight there.
By 15 minutes of fame. Right?
That's right. And I think you mentioned this in the XM show. America is basically America because of tea, right? It's what started the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. The American Revolution, the British imposed a tea tax and the Boston Tea Party, et cetera, and that's why we became a country of coffee drinkers, by the way, because everyone protested this tea tax and said, let's drink coffee from now on. And believe it or not, that's where it did the switch from tea to coffee.
Really? So, I mean, you're not just making that up.
No, that's an actual fact. And people went, no, I'm not going to drink that British stuff. Let's drink coffee.
America.
Yeah, right.
So this Wadmalaw Island is where you have your plantation. Was there already tea plants there?
Yes. So if I got back to the quick story, so I was here in America dealing tea, buying and selling, and read this article about the history of tea and thought, well, this is interesting. After the convention, I flew to Charleston because all the talk of growing tea had been in Charleston. So I went to Charleston, and nearby the airport, Somerville, was where the tea was grown. So I went to a library in Somerville and asked them to pull out everything they could on tea. And I discovered that Lipton Tea had an experimental station on Wadmalaw Island.
How come you just didn't Google that?
Well, there wasn't Google back in that time. Yeah. No, you're right.
Do you know how many people are going to be listening to this and going, he went to a library? I wonder why.
Yeah, why didn't he just Google it? So it just shows my age. There was no Google back then.
So you just did this. You wanted to know where it was, and you found it, and then what?
So then I discovered that Lipton had this experimental farm. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I sell Lipton a ton of tea, buying and trading tea. So I called up my contacts at Lipton and said, what's the deal with this tea plantation, tea experimental plot that you have in South Carolina? And they go, well, how'd you know about that? That's big hush-hush. And I said, well, I Googled it. No. I actually went to the library and found out that you guys had this going on. So I said, I want to visit it. And through a lot of inside, no, there's no way, it's very hush-hush, we don't allow anyone to visit it, et cetera, but through perseverance, I came here and saw the tea farm, and one thing led to another, and I said, I think I want to buy this place, because they were thinking of destroying it anyways, just plowing the tea under, and that'd be the end of it. But the reason Lipton did this was because there was a possibility of a dearth of tea or a lack of tea in America for the big producing companies like Lipton, et cetera. So they went in and started this tea farm from cuttings that came to America back in 1799. And the last tea plantation to exist in South Carolina was really started in 1888 and went till 1915. 1915, the fellow that was doing it passed away, and that was the end of tea. But tea plants don't die. They live for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So even though the owner passed away, his farm was still there, and the plants were still growing. So Lipton took cuttings from this tea plantation and moved it to where we are today with the experimental plot. And then I bought it from Lipton in 1987 and converted it from a R&D, research and development operation, to a commercial tea operation, and of course planted out a bunch more tea. And then in 2003, I partnered with the Bigelow Tea Company, which I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard of. Bigelow Tea is a family-run operation. Mr. and Mrs. Bigelow and their daughters run this amazing company, Bigelow. So I partnered up with them to further expand the operation and build a modern factory and invite visitors to come and see the tea farm. And that was really Mr. and Mrs. Bigelow it's really their baby now, because they love the fact that we're growing tea here, and we get over 80,000 visitors a year coming to see how tea is grown, because more and more people want to know where their food comes from and how it's made.
Was Lipton ticked that you did this?
No, I don't think I rival Lipton by any means, but
Yet.
Yes, right. But just to give you an example, for me, America imports over 200 million pounds of tea a year, right? For me to supply America with tea, told you the size of my island, right? I think I said 12 miles by 5 miles. I'd need about 4 islands that size to supply America with tea. So I don't think I'm a rival to them. But also the other thing that Lipton thought was, back then you have to look at the fact that we could not import any tea from China here. It was prohibited, just like Cuba. Nothing was allowed in. But Nixon became president. He opened up trade with China. And so then there was no dearth of tea for America because they had the ability to buy all the tea in China, so to speak. So that's why they lost interest in growing tea in this country. And I was able to pick it up from them for a reasonable price and convert it into a commercial operation. But I don't threaten them at all. Bigelow might threaten them, but I certainly don't.
We can grow tea in the U.S., right? I mean, we've got the soil, we've got the climate. Why don't we?
Well, there's no one crazy enough as me to do it. So that might be a start. But no, really, it's very tough. It's not easy to do. It's not like, okay, where am I going to get the tea plants from, number one, right? So it's very hard to import plants into this country now. They have to come in with no soil on them, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that they may live or die. And then you have to grow this tea. You've got to plant it, get it in the field, and it's going to take 2 or 3 years to get to maturity, maybe 4 years to get to maturity, so you can harvest the leaves and see what kind of quality you're going to get. So I was fortunate in being able to get this research station that all that had been analyzed, and these were the varieties. I have 220 different varieties here that I've whittled down to 8 that I like to plant out to the field because of quality, because of strength of the plant, the yield that the leaf will give me. So I had a jump start on everyone, and then you've got to harvest it mechanically, which is, I have the only tea harvester in America here, which was built back in 1978, and it's still running, and built by the Powell Farming Company as a one-off, and that machine still exists today, and there's nothing that can happen to that machine that we can't fix in 2 or 3 days here.
You let me run that sucker, and I'll test that theory.
It's the harvester that allows us to grow tea, because most of the tea around the world is harvested by hand. And to this day, in countries like India or Sri Lanka or countries in Africa, Indonesia, a normal tea farm my size, I would need 500 workers in the field. And over there, they have this huge labor force, but the average salary for a tea picker in these countries is about, I don't know, $5 a week, something like that, salary.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I couldn't find anyone in South Carolina to work for that. So with American ingenuity, we have this harvester that does just as good a job as people in the field picking the tea by hand.
Okay, so it's mainly a labor issue. That's interesting.
Yep.
Okay, how many people did you say go through your plantation as tourists a year?
About 80,000.
That's nuts. Did you ever think that you would get that many people that would be interested enough to come and see a tea plantation?
No, I didn't think we would get to 80,000, and we're still growing. I think it's amazing. I think it's wonderful that people come out here, they see the tea farm, they see the tea growing in the field. They can walk into, we have a huge gift shop, which obviously helps us tremendously, and they can walk through the factory and see through the glass how the actual tea is made. So it's kind of interesting. And then we have a trolley ride that takes them around the farm and talks about the horticulture side and the growing of the tea plants. And it stops at our greenhouse, and they get to see all the new plants that we're growing to go to the field to increase our acreage as we grow each year. To me, I didn't think it would be that popular, but we are near Charleston, and Charleston gets about 6 million visitors a year. So it's location, location, location.
Mm-hmm. We originally heard about my sister, Mary Ellen, that went on a tour there, and she texted me, and she's like, hey, check this out, the only U.S. tea plantation. I took the tour. They aren't crazy against ag. So that's literally what we knew about you, and we called.
Well, small world, isn't it? Word of mouth.
What are the future plans for your plantation?
Just to continue, keep growing. Obviously, Mr. and Mrs. Bigelow and Cindy, their daughter, is very much involved with what we're doing here. They love the fact, and it's kind of Mr. and Mrs. that are in charge of what goes on here and how we want to grow. So I think the easiest way to say is you're not going to find our tea in the supermarket because we can't compete with these countries that have a very cheap labor force. And I don't want to say poorer quality tea, but they don't have the freshest tea that we have here. So we are strictly going off of gift shops, high-end supermarket type thing, but really not even in supermarkets. So our main push is with the 80,000 visitors, we hope we don't charge people to come visit us either, which is unusual. So people can come, and what we hope is they get to drink all the hot tea they want, all the iced tea they want, and hopefully they buy some of the tea on their way out and become loyal to our brand and buy it online from us or whatever. Call us up, we send you the tea.
I would. I mean, because that's the whole thing. Then you go home when you have friends over, you break out the tea. Hey, let's drink tea, and then you can tell the whole story. To me, I think that's what people want. Now,
yep.
Bill, I've had a lot of dairy farmers on this show before, and a lot of them will tell you, the best thing is whole milk. It's the best drink in the world. And then they see these other things coming out, like, the Fairlife milk or different versions of milk, carbonated, flavored, all this different stuff. And they don't know how to take it. They don't want to come out and say they don't like it, but I can tell that's what it is. What is your thoughts on all the different makes, models, blends, and brews of teas you see in the grocery store these days?
Well, I don't have anything against any tea, but there are, I don't know if it's that way in dairy that you have good quality milk and poor quality milk. To me, I would think if you have a good breed of milking cows, then you're going to get good quality milk from them. But tea is all over the board, and it's flavored, like you say. There's Earl Grey tea. There's only 3 basic teas in the world, black, green, and oolong. And that's a form of how it's made in the factory. It all comes from the same leaves. It's how you make that tea in the factory to determine green, black, and oolong. And then on top of that, you have all the flavored teas like jasmine tea, Earl Grey tea. We have a peach tea, we have a raspberry tea, and it's just your basic tea that's had, ours is all natural flavor, is used in flavoring the tea. So to me, I agree with the dairy people because I drink whole milk, and actually I drink not pasteurized. I get it from the farmer down the road here on Wadmalaw. He has Jersey cows, and I get my milk from him, not pasteurized, and I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm. This is a point where I will say, yes, there are different qualities of milk. So thank you, dairy farmers. I know you were already emailing me and telling me, but you don't have to because we know it. Thank you very much. I'm fascinated by what you're doing. I love it, and especially because I'm fascinated when people don't necessarily have an agriculture background, although you kind of do, but that want to go into the production of something. To me, it's almost like you had a love of a product and wanted to experience literally every aspect of it. Am I anywhere close?
Absolutely. Absolutely. To me, there's nothing greater than taking it from the field to the cup. That's the way I put it. So we're growing it, we're harvesting it, we're processing it, we're packaging it, and we're delivering it to the customer. So I guess in a way you can call us vertically integrated in the tea world. And to me, that's wonderful. And the fact that we have all these visitors is just great. I walk into the gift shop and people are mulling around, looking at the tea, going, oh, this is great. And we get great reviews from people that have been here, that it's educational, that they've learned something that they never knew existed. And in fact, if you wanted to go see a large-scale tea operation, you'd have to leave the country to begin with.
I think it's fascinating. I can't wait to go there. If I can get anywhere close, we're going to make it happen. And yes, I do.
Right.
I've been talking with Jane. We're hoping to get a video of your tea harvester too. That would be very cool.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It kind of looks like, if I had to describe it, it's kind of a cross between a cotton picker and a tobacco harvester.
Bill, what advice would you give somebody that is so passionate about something that they want to experience every aspect of it like you did? So let's put it into view of agriculture, because most people that are listening right now are farmers. So somebody loves the aspect of growing corn, and they just, that's all they want to do. They want to experience every bit of it. What type of advice would you give them?
I would say, and this might upset a bunch of farmers out there, but I'm just going to talk about tea because that's what I know the most of.
Sure.
Tea growing is not the most complicated thing in the world to do. You've got to control your pH, obviously, your NPK. All these factors play a part in making a good quality tea. But if you're passionate about something and you want to take it to the consumer, your biggest problem, in my mind, is the marketing and getting the tea on the supermarket shelf or the grocery shelf or whatever shelf you want to get it on. To me, that's the biggest stumbling block, is getting your name out there and be known for it. So if I were to make suggestions to any farmers out there that want to do that, bring it right to the customer, you're going to have to do a good quality product, and it's going to take time, word of mouth, and you're going to have to build your clientele from zero. And to me, that's the hardest thing to do, because getting it on the supermarket shelf, I can remember, I'll tell you a quick story. When I first started here, I thought, oh my gosh, this is just fantastic what I'm doing, until I went to the first supermarket, to the headquarters, and sat down with the buyer, and I said to him, I've got something no one else in this country has. I have tea grown in America. It's fresh. It's really, really good. And we've got a really good product here. Don't you want to put this on their shelf? And they go, who cares whether it's grown in America? And I was like, whoa, talk about pop my bubble in a hurry. That was like, oh my gosh. Okay, so now I have to convince this guy who controls, 300-400 supermarkets to consider my tea. And then to get it on the shelf is very difficult. It costs a lot of money to do that, because you've got to, in certain cases, buy your way onto the shelf. And then once you're on the shelf, you've got to get the consumer to stop and look at you. Mm-hmm. I mean, if I gave you an analogy, peanut butter. You're in the supermarket and you're going to buy peanut butter. Well, you're going to buy the peanut butter that your mother gave you.
Yeah.
So Peter Pan, Jif, or whatever, you're not going to stop in front of peanut butter and go, gee, I wonder if there's a new peanut butter I haven't tried here. Right? So that just gives you how hard it is, the marketing side, to get your name known. So that would be my advice to everyone.
Bill, can I ask your age?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me that,
Oh,
Rob.
you don't have to tell me.
No, I guess I'm proud of it. I'm 71. Sucks getting old, I'll tell you that.
Well, the reason that I'm asking is that
Climbing up on these tractors is not easy at 71.
that's what the kids are for. Let them do it. Reason I
But
asked,
that's what I enjoy doing. That's the kicker of it all.
you literally just described why no farmer ever retires.
Yeah, because that's what we like doing.
Yes.
You know, today I knew I was going to talk to you on the phone. I'm out with the excavator burning some wood that we trimmed up from trees that have fallen down, this, that, and the other. I love doing that stuff.
Oh, I get it. I get it. The reason I asked you your age is because you have that figured out. And I don't know what it is in agriculture. I know what I know. I know my farm. I knew how I grew up. I grow corn. I grow soybeans. It goes to a place that gives me money. It's all the same. I don't market it. It's the value of my corn is the same value of my neighbor's corn, and I don't even know where it ends up, basically.
Right.
You figured this out. What I get from interviewing these young people in ag is that they have that figured out too. This next generation coming up, and I mean, like even like people that are down to 16 to like 25 up to 30, they have it figured out that if they're going to survive in whatever form of agriculture they're going to be in, that they've got to do just what you said. And they can't be able to do what their dads and their grandfathers did, where just take it to town and sell it. So I think it's interesting that's the advice you gave, because honestly, I'm seeing the people that are successful and young in agriculture, that's exactly what they're doing.
I think that is the case, and that's not to say, if you have 3,000 acres of corn, to just give it all up and start something new is crazy either. You can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to do it in stages. So, okay, put 10 acres off to the side, try something else, see if that works. Try and be vertically integrated. To me, that's the most important thing to do. Wheat, what does the farmer get for the wheat? I think they said it's 2 cents per loaf, something like that. That's crazy, It's crazy. You should be able to get the retail price for it if you do everything along the way.
Yeah.
To bring it to the consumer.
These kids, these punks, these Utes, they get a lot of hassling, right, for being lazy in that. But boy, all I do is see the opposite. These kids are hustling, and I'm kind of excited about growing old and letting them take care of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So you've been a farmer all your life then?
Yes, and I've gone through it. I've on the verge of bankruptcy my very first year, but it's nothing else that I would want to do. I feel the way about farming that I think the way you feel about tea.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I'll tell you a quick story. I started in Maryland because my father was a tea taster, and he came from Canada down to America to join McCormick and Company in Baltimore. It was a big spice company. They also had a tea division, so he was in charge of the tea division there. And that's when I started really getting I loved horses when I was a kid. So I started working in a horseback riding stable when I was 8 years old, mucking out the stalls and everything. A group of us got together and said, we should be making hay. We'd contract with the farmers and say, let us go in and cut your hay, and then we'll rake it, then we'll bale it, and we'll put it in the farmer's loft. We'll deliver it to the farmer and put it in their loft. And it was a pretty good deal. You know how much we made a bale delivered to the loft?
How much?
3 cents. 3 cents a bale. But it was a good living. We had a great time, out in the fields, farming it, making it, delivering the hay. But it was a great thing to do as a kid. I loved doing that stuff. 3 cents a bale, it gave me, $200 a week was a lot of money for a kid that's 12, 13 years old doing this stuff,
3 cents a bale, 200. Boy, you were chucking some bales, weren't you?
The truck that we put the hay on, the bales on, we didn't even have a driver. We just put a little rock on the accelerator and let it go by itself. And we all threw the bales up there, and we had one stacker stacking it.
That's awesome. I hope someday I can sit down and just have a cup of tea with you. You're a fascinating guy, and I think the draw to you is passion. That seems like it's when you find someone that you're drawn to, it's because the passion that they have, and it's so much fun to see someone that has such a passion for growing and enjoying and loving tea.
Well, you're always welcome down here. Let me know if you're coming. We'll put out the red carpet for you, as you're such a big celebrity.
I just want a cup of tea. That's all I want.
Oh, no problem there.
And a good one, because I doubt I've ever had one.
Well, that could be true. And like I say, the freshness is real important in tea. In fact, we have a tea that we sell at the beginning of every year that we don't even put it in tea bags. It's just in tins, small tins, and it's called our first flush tea. Nothing to do with the bathroom. It's to do with the first time the leaves flush up from the plant. That is not more than 2 weeks old. You can't get anything fresher than that.
Oh, that's okay. It sounds good. You've sold me.
Okay. Come on down and visit, Rob. We'd love to have you here.
I would love to. Bill, where can people find out more information about you?
It's very simple. You can go on our website, which is charlestonteaplantation.com. And we're also on Facebook and all the other modern stuff. Don't ask me what it is, but Pinterest and all these other things. But charlestonteaplantation.com, and it'll give you a wealth of information. You'll see some photos of the tea farm.
Bill Hall from Wadmalaw Island in South Carolina. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. You were on the XM show. You know, Emily and I looked at each other right after the show. I was like, this guy's got to be on a podcast. Fascinating what you've done. Thank you so much. And everybody else, we hope you catch us next time.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to the Shark Farmer Podcast. I am your host, Rob Sharkey. Please visit us at www.sharkyfarms.com. And just search for Shark Farmer to follow me on Twitter. Later.